In this session, I'm going to introduce you to the world of calculations in Tableau. By now, we know that Tableau is very transparent to use. It is highly intuitive. I can do a lot of things with a simple drag and drop kind of aspects. I'm able to connect to data very easily. I'm able to draw different kinds of charts by simply dragging and dropping the fields. So the same way, probably the calculations also can be done with that level of simplicity in Tableau. So the moment I am able to do a Tableau calculation, probably I'm I'm able to interact with the data much better. I'm able to analyze the data with much more extensions rather than just doing some kind of plottings on the raw data. If I am able to do some kind of calculations, probably I am extending the benefit of visualization. So I am able to fix some kind of problems that are existing with the data, or I can bring in new dimensions, new measures, and I can really look at new forms of visualization. I can bring in different new aspects of interactivity. So obviously calculations will really help me to do much more additional visualization. So they provide a lot of flexibility, but at the same time they introduce some layer of complexity because I have to write some formulas, and probably they are bringing even some layer of sophistication to our analysis. So basically understanding how we can initiate the calculations in Tableau. So not just looking at what are the list of calculations that are available, but our intention is to really understand how calculations can really play a role to solve our business problems. Why should I do a calculation for this data? What is that extra benefit that this calculation will bring to my visualization? So I should more try to understand how can I solve the problems and add more and more functionality towards the visualizations, towards the creation of dashboards, etc. So that is where I really need to move towards when I am doing some kind of calculation. In Tableau, we talk about three levels of calculation. One is row level. Row level is for each individual record. Two, there are aggregate level calculations. So we can aggregate the data at some layer and we can calculate. And three, there are table based calculations which are calculated after the aggregates are being computed. So these are the three layers of calculations which we really need to master. So we should really look at how do we do the calculation, right? How do we really differentiate between these three kinds of calculations? Then we'll introduce what are called as parameters. We'll talk about them slightly later. Then how do I work with the parameters? And finally, I should also look at how is my calculation performing. So we have to really assess on all these aspects. So, but for now, we'll just look at what a very introductory aspect of how a calculations are working for us in Tableau, right? Okay, so we can take some data set to go ahead. So let me stick to my copy chain query example itself to do the calculations also. All right. Now, if I talk about a calculation, it is available in Tableau as a calculated field. The way the calculation is performed is through calculated field. I get it from analysis. I say create a calculated field. One way I can create a calculated field like this. or the other. Okay, let's say this is the empty area here. On this empty area, on the data tab, on the data window, I click on create calculated field. Even that will create the same. Or let's say on this particular field, right, create calculated field. So this create will actually take this field as an input to do the calculation. So there are different ways of initiating this calculated field. But in all these things, what typically happens is whenever you are doing any kind of calculation, that result of that calculation comes up as a new dimension or a new measure. Depending on how the output comes, it will be created as a new dimension or a new measure. So there will be a new field that would be entered into your data window. Whenever we are creating a calculated field, a new dimension or a measure gets created in the data window. And every time the calculation is a code which consists of some functions, right, or which use some other fields that are there in the data, some kind of constants. So some such kind of usage of various aspects or some kind of operators. So all this together form a small piece of code which will give me a result, and that result will be stored as a part of a new dimension or a measure with some kind of a name. Now this kind of calculations I can have per each row, then we call them as row level. So which means for every record I am creating one new field, or it could be an aggregate, which means I'm doing some kind of an aggregation, summation across different records. So that's an aggregate level calculation, or in some cases it could be a table level. Now the simple way, let's get started. Right, at any point in time, let's say we are let's say on the sales. On the sales, I really want to start a calculated field. I right click, I say create calculated field. Now this is how it comes, right? I create calculated field. So the better thing, first click on this so that we get some kind of help. So there is a name that it is asking for. So if I look at, this is the place where I give a name. So once I create, let's say I create simple calculation 1. And if I say apply, this calculation 1 either goes into the dimension or in the measure depending on how the output typically comes out. So it gets created as an additional field in the data window based on the name and based on the output that it provides. Then this is what we call as the code editor. Right? This is the area where we are actually writing the code. Now, so whatever the calculation, we can write it here. There is a lot of auto completion that Tableau does for us. We enter a first few letters, we get all the hints that are starting with that particular letter. It recognizes all the fields that are there in our data. It recognizes all the functions, and based on that it provides some kind of calculations for us. So it's a code which gets inserted. Let's say I want to divide profit. I want to create one field called profit percentage. Okay, profit percentage, and that's a new field that I want to create. A very simple calculation I want to give. One, either I drag it from here, profit, right? If you look at this, I drag profit from here, it gets written as profit, divided by, I drag sales from here. So profit divided by sales Let's say I am calling it as a profit percentage. So I am writing my formula here. I am writing my calculation here. We'll talk about some better calculation. But just to understand what we write, we are talking of this location where we write this kind of algorithm. Then at the bottom here, it's a kind of an indicator for me, which says if there are any kind of errors in the code that we have written, it will typically highlight that our calculation is having some kind of errors. Right, so that's the space where I can check whether my whole calculation is valid or some kind of errors are present. When errors are present, probably I can change my formula before applying it. But now, here you see, these are, this is typically the formulas list, right? The list of formulas which are available in Tableau, just like Excel. This is a list of formulas that are available in Tableau, which we can really use for various calculation. So there is some kind of a grouping also that is done, right? If you see number, okay, there are some trigonometric functions, some mathematical related functions are there, right? Like absolute values, right? Or we have square root, rounding, power, maximum, minimum, right? So some mathematical exponent, logarithm, natural logarithm. So there are some mathematical, there are some trigonometric, sine, cos, tan, sine inverse, cos inverse, tan inverse, right? A lot of these go as a part of your number based functions. And there is a small representation help regarding each one of them and how do you really give inputs to each one. So there is some kind of number formulas. Then we have string related formulas, especially doing some kind of manipulations associated with string. Let's just see. Alright, now here if I look at the string, okay, now there are different kinds of things like ASCII, character, contains, ends with. So it is helping us to find some kind of finding, matching of a string, right? Matching of some value within a particular string, or I can get the left, right. Typical Excel formulas you could see even here in Tableau as well. Right, something right, replace, find and replace kind of stuff, or something convert into uppercase, lowercase, all these kinds of formulas. Then similarly we can look at date kind of formulas. I know there is some problem that is coming up. Okay, now looking at the string, okay, these are the ones. Probably I can have the date related. We can add the dates. We can find the difference between the dates, right? We can get the part of the date. We can use some kind of maximum, minimum on the dates, day, month, year, today. Different kinds of formulas with respect to date. I can add some kind of an interval to a date, get today's date, all that stuff. Similarly, we have few functions which are associated with the type conversion. Okay, it's not the somewhere some problem is coming out, so it's not allowing me. But what you could see is you can actually go through the different kinds of dates or different kinds of different classification of functions, which can really help you in doing all these things on a step by step. So just what you could see is you have type conversions. So when I say type conversion related, you can convert one type of a field into the other. So there will be formulas which talk about converting from integer to a string or string to a date, some such kind of stuff. In the logical, we are talking about the decision making functions, if then else. So we have if then else function, we have case functions, some such kind of functions which are more logical in nature. Then if I talk about aggregate, here we are going to look at the summation, summing, minimum, maximum, standard deviation across all the data of some particular dimension. That I can get them as aggregate. Then I can get a few pass-through functions, some user-specific functions, and we also have some table related calculations which are probably will deal with these slightly advanced ones slightly at a later point. But whatever is the function that I am selecting, it gives me a kind of a help on the left hand, on the right hand side. A typical syntax of that particular formula. Right here, let's say I want to create profit percentage, right? That is what we have done earlier. So here I simply want to drag profit. I don't want the sales out here. I am dividing it by the sales. So it is simply a saying that it is a float, because the type of it is simply a floating type. And if required, I can use any of these formulas. If we see there are if null, if, right, is date, is full name. If we just look at all these formulas, it gets a lot of comfort to us. What formula I need to use at what point in time. So we are simply using this, and on the right hand side, once we have selected, we are getting the details about that selection. If I select a formula, I get the explanation of that particular formula. If I type in a simple calculation, it will tell me what is the outcome of that, what is the type of that outcome. So basically, if I want to use the output of one formula as an input to the other, which is what we call as nesting, this mechanism can really help us, right? So that's it. And once you write one simple formula and let's say apply. Right now we have written one simple formula and let's say I am doing an apply. Because the calculation is valid, there is some calculation that has occurred and profit percentage as a field came here. Now if required, I can do the plotting for profit percentage. Right? So this is just like any other field. Now the profit percentage is just like any other field. So I can typically do some kind of workouts based on the profit percentage. Now there are, apart from a lot of these formulas that we have used, right, we can very well use and, or, not, these kind of logicals also, and lot of operators like plus talking about adding numeric or date values, minus talking about subtracting, the star talking about multiplying the numeric values, dividing the numeric values, power of the numerical values, parenthesis talking about the order of operations. The field names are typically enclosed in square brackets like this, right? If I have to go with the level of detailed calculations, then they are enclosed in braces. Then this is an indication of a comment. So all these things also can be used parallelly inside the calculations along with the various functions, formulas, etc. Now once we start using them, we get a good hold on all these things. So that's where we can take some kind of examples to really work out at different layers, computing the calculations at different layers, the row levels, the aggregate levels, etc. But what we really need to understand is the role the calculations play as a part of our visualization process. We have to be very much convinced with that kind of mechanism. All right. Thanks a lot for listening to this session. Thank you very much.